Carrie from the Health Conservancy.
Hi, everybody.
So they have great resources too. As you know, they serve landowners who do conservation easements and other conservation practices on their property here. So our agenda today is to talk a little bit about some different resources available to you, and to how many of you have heard the message that flash flooding is a major concern now that we've got burn slopes? Okay. How many people here have gone out to get flood insurance? Okay, it does stand. Okay, so if you did not lose your home in the fire and you are at the bottom of a draw or in a place that sometimes has, overland water moving, water moving across land, anything like that, we really encourage you to speak to your insurance agent about the National Flood Insurance Program. There's quite a bit of information on the back table about it. The agents in the area have had some very recent education from FEMA, from the folks who manage that program, so they should be very aware of what the conditions for the policies are right now. They will write a flood policy right now. So even though we've had this disaster, we've had a declaration, all that stuff, you still can get a flood policy. What we're hearing from our partners at the Conservation Service and the Conservation Districts in Wenatchee and Ellensburg from the fires in 2012, folks, their house did not go in the fire, it went in the flood, and they said, we wish the fire had just taken it because the flood brought so much stuff down and just did such a number on their house. The tricky thing about fire or flood after fire is that when water mixes with ash, it changes the specific gravity of things, and things float that you would never think would float before. They said they saw a car-sized boulder come down Colico Creek after the fire. So it's a really big hazard. We've already had some rain events and some washouts of different places, so I do encourage you, if you've got property that you still need to protect, any kind of structure, talk to your insurance agent about that National Flood Insurance Program, and they can give you the details on it. Can I take a look?
Good morning. My name is Guy Gifford. I'm a forester with the Department of Natural Resources. And I've been working for the department as a forester since 1991, and I've been helping with recovery workshops since '96, whether it's fire, insects, or windstorm damage. And I'm hoping to cover some of these topics and questions that you have listed here. Some of the objectives today talk a little about tree survival. Which of my trees are going to survive? If you decide to log, how soon and how to get started in logging. A little about bark beetles. People all have concerns about bark beetles and dead trees. Talk a little about wildlife. As for this process or anything you can do to help the wildlife, short-term as well as long-term. Some regulation on logging and about how to select a logger. First thing I'd like everyone to do right now is before you start a big process like this, you gotta have a plan, some goals, some values. So I can take a couple minutes and think about it. If you have pen and paper, write down what did you value of your property? Why is your property important? So take a couple minutes, think about that, write that down. And then also, as you go from now to the future, what are some of your short and long-term goals? Be specific with it, because that'll help you take the information you're learning today to help you meet your needs. Some examples I have written down here: maintaining the view of the south. I want to help wildlife, and be specific about wildlife. Songbirds, turkeys, deer. Also, you might want to cover economic value. Take a couple minutes, think about these, write this down, because this is very critical for you to be successful, is knowing what you desire from the future. Things that you felt was special about your property, what you liked about your property. It was paid for. That is important. Trees. You like the trees.
I really like a lot of the native plants.
You like the native
Like that,
plants.
that
And why did you like the trees? They're just pretty to look at? So you value trees for the aesthetic quality. Why do you like the native plants? Just like the plants. So aesthetics. So it sounds like you like to look at the plants. So you value just having the native plants. So that's an aesthetic, we call it aesthetic quality. You value for the aesthetics because they're pretty, just to look at and have to touch. Any other values you have for your property? What are some things that you're hoping your short-term, can you share with me some of maybe your short-term goals that you're hoping to accomplish next year, and maybe some of your long-term future goals you'd like to see done in the next 0 to 5?
Recreate habitat.
For what?
Wildlife.
What type of wildlife?
Deer, bear,
Okay.
We had a nice amount of pine grass coming in, which I think may have been all right with the fire, but after the firefighters drove over it, I'm not so sure.
So you like the pine
Like to
grass?
continue that trend.
And why did you like the pine grass?
It's beautiful and it's native and it's natural and that kind of stuff.
Again, it's an aesthetic quality. It gave you a lot of, it was pretty, it was native. Those are very good reasons.
Also ecological.
Ecological. Okay, any other? Okay, one of the things as you go down this path is, and why follow up with questions, we've got to be specific. Okay, I look at making choices like every time I go to the store to buy ice cream. There are a lot of good choices out there, but sometimes you have to make decisions, set priorities, because you won't be able to get everything. So you're going to have to set your priorities down and work through those priorities. The key thing as you set these down and you work through this process of change, your goals, your values will change as you learn more and other influences come in. So be prepared for change. The reason I said write these down is that you start meeting with people to help you. You need to go revisit these because you're going to hear a lot. All of us represent a different value. He's representing erosion control. I am representing trees. We talk from our perspective mainly, but we'll also look at the big picture. You are the individual landowners. You need to take all the information that we give you, scientific, and apply it so you meet your goals and your objectives. Okay, so let you know we all have slight biases because of that. I love my trees more than other things. Ken Bevis couldn't be here today. He's a local person, one of our biologists, whose property did burn. His house made it, but I believe he lost an outbuilding. He values wildlife more. I value trees more. I'd rather see a tree live. He'd rather see the top cut off so it's dead for wildlife. Okay? Different values, but different. Same thing though. So that's where your values is very, really important. That's number one. Now what I feel you need for your property, what do you feel for your property? Okay. One of the things as you start working your property is safety. Okay? I'm a forester. Trees have burned. Be careful out there. Look for these trees like that. Look for burnt out roots. When you're walking your property, you want to make sure we have no more bad things happening out there. So be careful when you're out working your property. We did have some good windstorm events here recently, which hopefully will take some of these trees out. So you have less hazard trees. The other thing we look out for as you walk your property is weak tops. Broken tops on the top of the trees. We call them widow makers for a reason. They do kill people. One thing is, as we go through this process, you're going to hear some information from me. You might talk to your neighbor, a logger, a different forester, who might tell you a different story or a different outcome. The key thing is we're probably all right. Every story has a grain of truth with nature. One thing about this fire, though, like to remind people, is when you hear these stories, ask them why, ask them details. This is what we call a midsummer fire. Okay, that means it did midsummer. If there's a late summer fire, some of the things I tell you would be different. Because how ecological restoration happens differently depends on when the fire burned. The insect life cycle, the disease life cycles, all is a timing issue irrelevant to the fire. They're going to do what they're going to do no matter what the fire did or did not do. And those are the things that will factor some of the things we'll be talking about. One thing about tree survivability, we're going to talk a little bit about what mechanisms these trees have survived. Then we'll look at how we can look at those survival mechanisms to see how we can determine if our trees survive. One thing about ponderosa pine, how many of you guys have ponderosa pine? Did anyone heard the term bull pine? Oh, one. How about yellow pine? You know what the difference is between yellow pine, bull pine, and ponderosa? Nothing. Exactly, nothing. The same tree, just different people have different names. The key thing with ponderosa pine, it has a very thick bark that insulates that layer under the bark we call the cambium, the phloem. That's a living tissue. That's very important to stay living. So it has a very thick bark to survive wildfire. It's designed to survive a wildfire. The other thing, it has deep roots, deep tap roots. That prevents it from blowing down. Two, it helps protect the roots from the heat of the soil. If the soil got too hot, it can cook the roots. Okay? It also, at the end of the branch, has what we call a fairly large bud. Bud survivability is a key indicator whether your tree is still alive and whether it will make it 1, 3, or 5 years from now. And in that bud, we also have large needles that help shield that bud from the heat. So those are a couple mechanisms it has. The other thing is, if you notice, a lot of times your pine trees have a lot of dead branches on it. You guys notice that? That's another defensive mechanism. It self-prunes. People, I always, when I do fire workshops on protecting from fire, I always think, well, what's the bigger hazard, dead or green branches? From a fire standpoint, it's the green branches. If a green branch gets hot, and you put it in a campfire, does it go whoosh? Versus the dead, yes, dead branches burn. Green branches go whoosh because of close. Turpentine gas is released with the pine needles. And that's why a green branch goes whoosh. And that's why when you see our pine trees burn up, it doesn't just burn slowly. Usually it goes whoosh. And that's why generally green branches are more hazardous. And that's why the dead branches is a defensive mechanism. Well, so they won't burn, but they don't cause the tree to go whoosh as quickly. The other tree, Douglas fir. Okay, how many heard from the red fir? Okay, depending where I'm at, Douglas fir and red fir are known as the same tree species. Red fir is often what we call the firewood version, because when you cut down a Douglas fir, it's red in the center. The firewood cutter is called red fir. It also gets thick bark, but the key thing, it takes a little longer before you get to that thick bark. When it's young, have you guys noticed your fir has a lot of pitch? Okay, that is not a defensive mechanism. Pitch burns. But when it gets older, the pitch goes away. It gets a thick bark like ponderosa pine. About age 40, it starts surviving these high intense fires. Okay, it also generally has a fairly deep root system, so it can, hopefully some of the roots can survive the fire. Now, tree survivability. How do I determine if my tree is surviving? It's part science, part art. The science is if you have a certain amount of branches alive, a certain amount of ground scorched or surviving, and a certain amount of bud survival, your tree has an excellent chance. Now, the art of this is, how do I determine that when I'm looking up? It's really easy if you cut the tree down. But what do you have when you cut the tree down? A dead tree, okay? And so there's a lot of research done, and they did do what we call destructive sampling. They look at trees, they cut them down, they sample them over a several year period to see what are the tools, what's the science, why did this tree survive, why they did. And then they wrote papers, and they try to figure out how do they relate to a person like me, a forester, who doesn't want to go cut down trees just because, or a landlord. How can I use some simple tools to make a good determination? Not a perfect determination, just a good determination with a good chance of success. And that's what we'll talk about. It's actually pretty simple. A couple things we look at is score. How much of the branches burn? How much of the branches are now brown? Okay. One thing is we look at percent of crown burn. So if you have a 100-foot tall tree, 50 feet of the tree in living branches. Sometimes it's hard to determine that, or was living branches. How much of that living branch burned? Is it 50%, 60%, 30%? And that is pretty much just a popular estimate. You just look, about half of it's still green. 1/3 of it's still green. Okay, those are a couple easy tools they found out over the years has a strong correlation. And what they did found out looking at that helped me determine bud survivability. This booklet's at the back. Okay, it has a handy chart in it that says, if I have a ponderosa pine and this much crown survival, what are the odds of that tree dying? Okay, and this is an excellent tool. So it's pretty simple that way. I've used this tool over the years with a fair degree of success. Now the key thing is this is 1 year survivability. We'll try to talk a little about the fact that we'll kill the tree in 3 to 5 years. Okay. The other thing I'd like to point out is in the next couple weeks, you're going to start seeing pine needles in the ground. Okay. One key thing about trees, only a living branch will shed pine needles. So if you see a tree with red needles, no needles, green needles, the no needle area, that branch is still alive. Now whether the bud is still alive or not, will that branch still help the tree or not, in the future, can't really tell you unless you go look in that bud. Okay, but at that time, that branch is still alive. So that's another indicator. This goes back to how much you value your trees. Okay, the best answer when we talk about crown burn is what's green versus brown. If you really, really want to keep some trees for whatever reason, because your trees are so borderline, this may give you that other tool to help select which trees to leave. You start seeing a lot of no-needle trees, and and you say, all right, I'm going to chance it, leave some of these extra trees, because I can see if I go with that, it's now 50% scorched, because I have 20% green, 30% no needles, then the remaining 50% still solid red. That may change your factor on how much you're willing. It goes back to your values. Okay, whether you want to make money to recover some loss, or if you want to keep the tree for the other values you have.
Could you just wait for the tree to see if it falls? Once it falls, just pull them off to the side and burn them?
Yes, you can. The key thing we'll talk about, a couple things we'll talk about in section blue stain, why you want to make a decision earlier. The only reason you make a decision earlier is economic, if you want to lock. Okay, if you want to recover money now, you can make a decision early. If money is not an objective, you can use time to decide and wait a year or two. Okay?
And I believe the biologists say that leaving dead trees, the bird trees, are really good for habitat as well, a certain amount of that.
You're jumping ahead.
Oh, well, we're talking about cutting down
it does.
trees, so-
Yes, it does. Right now, I am looking strictly from more of a, I want to recover a little bit of money from my property. Which tree is going to make it?
Oh, you're looking economic.
Right now, but I'll be covering some of those. Good four-leg question, though.
Well, on the economic part, I mean, just what I've heard from talking to a variety of people, including loggers and millers, is that there's really no use in logging your pines right now. I mean, are you hearing something differently? That it would be fir if you're going to do it, and you need a lot of it.
That's a whole other issue.
Okay, because I mean, I just don't want the promoting that acting like people could make a lot of money off of this is a little bit, disingenuous.
It's funny, when I was designing the
Okay.
presentation, what do I talk about first?
Okay.
Do I talk about economics? Do I talk about survival? I just try to go this route.
I mean, if someone has their own personal mill or a portable mill they can
Yeah.
borrow from someone, they can do something personally with their wood. But I think on a bigger picture, what we've been hearing is that there's not a lot of commercial value out there.
Correct.
Okay.
Back to the bark, we have some fir trees that are fairly large, thick bark, totally black all the way around. So what's the best strategy on that? Just wait and see? Is there a way to tell whether it
You
got
can
into
peel back the
silent
bark a
mode?
little bit, just a little bit.
Uh-huh.
You want to do it on 4 different sides. This book kind of tells about to see if it's still green. The other thing, another tool sometimes I use is what we're really concerned about is how hot the ground burns.
Right.
Okay, normally our ecosystem, before we did a lot of fire suppression, the fire burned fairly quickly to go to the area. The tree is designed to survive a very hot fire, but of low duration. Much like if you take a hand of your wood stove, or your gas stove, or a campfire, you go like this, it gets hot, but you don't burn. But if I have a little flame and hold it over it, it'll burn my hand. So what happened now is some areas, you have deep ducts of pine needles. If those pine needles totally consume, it cooked the roots. One factor I started, and I haven't seen this published, but it's just one of those things I started noticing over the years, is if I look down, and they do talk about this about consumption, if I can see, kind of make out that burnt material under my feet, that's some pine needle, that's burnt pine cone, that's a burnt grass, that means it burned lower intensity. If I look down and can't really, that's ash, that's bad, okay? Then your wood will probably cook. The wood call it a heat with long duration heat and penetrate that bark.
So
Okay?
if you do peel it back, what are you looking for? You go all the way to see if the xylem flowing with
Yes.
moist or what?
Exactly, moist, white,
So does that make it more vulnerable to beetles
No.
if you do that?
no. It doesn't harm the tree that much of a sample. We're trying to minimize how much we do because your tree is stressed multiple times right now, so we want to do as little damage to the tree as we can. But you do need to do some sampling. The nice key thing with this, you don't have to sample every tree. You just say, all right, I do a reference. This is my worst trees. I'll start with my worst tree. It's dead, all right? And I go to a moderate tree. It's still alive. So it starts giving you a guide. And this is kind of the science and art of it without destructive sampling everything. How do I sample a couple key indicators to give me a representation of what I can? The first thing is start with the crowns. If the crown's totally gone, forget it. Don't even try.
If you've got pitch on the outside of the door. I don't think it, how could that be good?
Good question. That's usually some type of injury. Typically, it's not a sign of insect or disease at this stage of life.
Well, this is now.
Yes, this is after the fire. This is after the fire. I don't have an answer for that. I've seen it, but I don't remember ever reading anything about it, or just my experience of that being a sign dealing with tree survivability. How's that?
There's some trees going down the driveway for a bunch of the slip. And then it turns into an easement. And I was told it was an easement all the way, but I found out it's not. And what, am I responsible for the trees? For DNR? Do I have to call them and tell them to come look at the trees, or what I'm gonna do? I've been trying for 35 years for them to hear me, and they just,
Say it again. Okay, on a road.
I have a road that comes off Hillshaw Road, and I thought it was an easement. I thought it was my road, and it's probably supposed to be your road. Then I found out it's not your road, it's an easement. Then I found out that part of that is not even an easement, it's belongs to the forest.
The state, or the Forest Service.
Yes. And I've been trying since I lived there, to please take care of this, and they become coming out around.
I don't work for that shop.
Now it's.
That side of the agency.
If these things start falling where we're driving,
I
that's my
would
concern.
call, here's the number, 509, this is a standard number, it'll be on my last slide anyway, 684-7474, and ask, talk to the South Okanogan State Lands. I'm not sure.
Because I don't want to be driving one of those things
Yeah.
falls
And
and
so,
tickling me or my neighbors.
so you have to talk to, and there's some, you have to look at the easement too, your easement may give you certain corrections, a certain fee. This is a whole nother subject, legal matter, I don't even want to touch because it's dealing with easements and lawyers. I'm a forester. But I know I've read many, many easements over my years, and they're all different. That's what I can tell you. Unless someone wants, yeah. So crown scorch, and this is an example of crown scorch. You can't see it really well, but this was brown, this is green, and so this tree would have like 20% crown, 80% crown scorch. This would have like 40% crown scorch. An example, it doesn't show very well, but it's an indicator of how much crown scorch and how much decline. Fir trees can handle less crown scorch. That publication I have here, or if you don't want the whole publication, this handout does have both Douglas fir and Ponderosa pine on it, and they do have different survivability rates. One thing about,
What percent on the pine?
I look at this chart, it's
Okay.
based on the size of the tree.
Okay,
The bigger the tree, the more scorch you can handle.
okay.
Because one of the things is, we're getting to here, is how much of the bowl is scorched. Okay, smaller trees can handle less. On our larger trees, i.e. generally the trees I call that you would log, crown scorch is the best indicator. On the trees that you wouldn't log, if we had a market, bowl scorch is more indicated because the bark is not as thick. Just this is a guideline, 8 inches less with the bowl scorch, anything bigger go up to crown scorch. There's some overlap in that, but you got a lot of scorch on the trees, higher chance of dying, because the smaller trees have the thin bark. Generally, crown scorch is your best indicator overall for the forest. This is the chart that's in that handout in the book. It kind of says here that if I have a 14-inch tree, 50% of my crown is scorched. 14-inch tree, I have a 30% of the tree dying. The blue area means you have less than a 50% chance of the tree surviving. Okay? And this is for 1 year. One of the things is making sure you have goals. Because one of the things is some people want to regenerate, and seed trees are important. Leaving some seed or planting, and we talk about revegetation. So you take that, and where you do that, put that out, because you might want to take a little more, if you don't have a ton of, if most of your trees look like they're toast, dead, and you have small percentage, you might want to take a chance of leaving some of those with the seed. And if they have more of a no needle area, lesser green, you might chance that hopefully they produce some small amount of seed. Like when a tree gets stressed, the number one thing plants want to do when they're stressed is reproduce. They want to put out some cones next year. Okay, if they have enough nutrients, that's the first thing they're going to do before they die, is try to reproduce. One of the things a lot of people are concerned about is if I do nothing, if I leave my trees out there, Am I going to cause a forest health epidemic? The easy answer is no, you're not. Okay? Will you have an isolated problem here or there? Maybe. Okay? One of the key culprits that people are concerned about is bark beetle. One thing about the bark beetle, they eat the sugar layer in the bark. It's the same thing that porcupines eat. It's also survival food for Native Americans before Europeans settled. Okay, they like that sugar layer in the bark. The thick bark protects that phloem, that sugar layer. Okay, so it keeps it more moist. If that sugar layer gets heated, take sugar, add a little heat, you get caramel. Okay, bark beetles don't like that. They like that sweet sugar. Okay, but generally the bark is fairly protective of all other trees, and so you may still have some active phloem. So you may see some beetle insects. The key thing when I'm talking about, it's funny, I was reading some, every time this happened, I refresh my knowledge. I go out and see the newest research, see what works. I was reading another study, I didn't agree with it at all, and I read the end of it. The study was based on the Millicrick fire over here, and that fire was burning late September. My experience was different. Remember, this is a midsummer fire. So not everything you read about the Millicrick fire, what they experience bark beetles doing the same here, because of the timing of the fires and the bark beetle life cycle. The bark beetle still did the same thing, affected that fire differently than this fire because of the timing of when bark beetles fly and when fire burns. Generally, what this means is a lot of our bark beetles fly July, August. Okay, we could very easily have bark beetle flight right after this fire. For a late summer fire, the bark beetles usually have flown before the tree burns. That makes sense. And so that's why this is important that we did have trees. This is the bark beetle. See how tiny they are? Just want to make sure people know they are tiny. The chance of you seeing bark beetles in trees is going to be slim. You're going to see other insect disease. Trees.
So that means basically our forests are more vulnerable because the forests that did burn, trees that didn't burn are more vulnerable to this flying bark beetle because
Yes.
of the timing.
Yes.
So our healthy forests are more at risk.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
More at risk. But the question is, how much at risk, or do we really need there? Hopefully we'll get through that here in a minute or two. One of the things about pine trees, all the trees, they have natural defenses. When that's pitching, you drill a 16-inch hole in the tree, pitch comes out. Okay, generally dead trees are losing some of that mechanism, and that's not going to happen very well. So you may not see pitching. This is an indicator that the tree won the battle. You have a little gobble pitch out to your first knuckle, a beetle in it, and it's white in color. Tree won. Yay. Okay, so yeah, it's good for the tree. All right? Okay. Generally, though, if you start seeing red in the pitch, the beetle won. What is that red material? Sawdust. Beetle goes in. The pitch comes out, picks up sawdust as the beetle swims against the tree. What you have is actually a competition. The beetle's trying to swim against the pitch. If the tree's healthy, a lot of pitch, a lot of pressure in that tree, the pitch comes out quickly and the beetle loses the battle. Stressed trees like naturally before the fire started, more or less most of the trees are in a stressful environment to begin with. Moisture is the number one issue here in this area. Now we add another stress factor of fire. So the chance of the tree successfully defending is much reduced because of that. As this process goes on with bark beetles, you'll start seeing woodpecker damage. Woodpeckers are going usually after our secondary insects and wood borers. And someone's asking about ecological value. Is some people say, well, I don't want bark beetles. I hate bugs. If there's one critter who loves a bark beetle, this is it. The woodpecker. So just because it's bad for you may be good for something else in the ecosystem. The key thing is going to, if you had some bark beetles, is it going to affect your goals and your values for your property? That's the key measure about bark beetles. Is it going to do something so I don't get what I want for my property? Okay. One of the first beetles we see, and you may have already seen this, is this guy, red turpentine bark beetle. This is generally happening 4 feet less on your tree. Okay, so the biggest the bark beetle. We have 3 different bark beetles. Actually, back up. I forgot where we're at. We have 4 bark beetles here. Red turpentine, western pine beetle, mountain pine beetle, and pine and gray. Spokane, we only have 3. You guys pick up mountain pine beetle here. But the nice thing is western mountain pine beetle do the same thing, same life cycle. They just 2 different species that do the same thing. This is what you'll probably see first on your tree. So if you start seeing these big gobs of pitch, you know, it's probably that big, attacking the base of your tree is a sign of a red turpentine beetle attack. We don't consider this beetle to be a tree killer. It usually comes in when the tree is already going to die anyway. Okay, so this is one of those things that may raise a red flag in you. I got bark beetles, but then we start saying, will it impact my goals and objectives? The chance of killing a tree is slim. Could you lose a tree? The chance of killing a tree, you might be willing to live with that risk. If it's a low probability of killing any remaining trees. Generally, this comes in after the other beetles attack, killing a tree, or like I said, is dying from fire. We often see these attacking stumps from a logging operation because the tree is dead and it just attacks the stump. The other bark beetle we have is Douglas fir. Reason I bring this slide up is a lot of times what we see as people is different things attacking our trees. Can you see these little tunnels here in the big tunnels? This is actually a bark beetle. This is what we call a secondary insect flathead wood borer, or a round-headed wood borer. I believe that was flat-headed there. This is a picture of a flathead wood borer. How many have seen this guy? A lot of people see this one because when you go find a dead tree, this comes in after the tree's already dead. And this is what generally when I talk to people, they think is a bark beetle. But this is a secondary insect, part of the decomposition cycle. This one has a flat head, another one has a round head. It can be, if you're fishing, awesome fishing grub. Good for a hook, nice size, nice meaty, whitey grubs for fishing. This is what the woodpeckers really, really, truly love. Because the bark beetle, I gotta eat a lot of bark beetles to get full.
Yeah.
This is big and meaty and make woodpeckers and the birds happy. One thing about bark beetles, since your trees are stressed, that phloem may still be sugary, but the transportation system may be done. Or two, you may have good phloem sugar up there, but as you mentioned something about the trunk, it may be totally dead and scorched down here, so no pitch can rise anymore. So your tree can maybe be dead here to the bark beetle, but still green up there for the bark beetle. Okay? So we want to look for sometimes the sawdust, because you might just see sawdust in the crevices. Okay? You can look for pitch tube. You generally see less pitch tube than fire kill, just because the trees can't put out pitch tubes. Red turpentine is generally what you see. Typically though, bark beetle is not a problem what we see with fires. One thing about bark beetles, they are native to the ecosystem. In this area, you guys had bark beetles, have bark beetles. They were actually killing 5 to 10 to 20 trees here and there. From a forester standpoint, that's just what happened. And as long as they're killing 5 to 10 or 20 trees here and there, I don't worry about it, because that's the normal endemic level. It's just like here this winter, half a dozen of us are going to get sick. Doesn't matter what we do. If we exercise, if we take care of ourselves, we'll be sick fewer days, and fewer of us will get sick. So there's a certain amount that I just live with. What we're trying to prevent is 5, 10, 20, 40 acres dying. That's what we're really trying to prevent. Typically, what we notice with bark beetles in a large-scale fire like this, there's just a lot of food for them to go to initially, and so they generally don't go after the green trees. Two, I don't know if you have experienced epidemics after fire, but I've never really had, all my years, people calling and following me, I got trees dying. Now that someone, if it was your 5 trees, and they're the last 5 trees, they get hit, I was devastated. That will happen occasionally. But from the big perspective, we don't see an epidemic coming after a fire. Winter storm damage is a totally different story. But after fire, I've yet to really experience a bark beetle epidemic after a fire. Okay?
I'm curious, are they gonna be able to hand out little trees that we can go plant, like you see them doing in the forest?
Probably.
We ourselves could go out and replant our lands with trees.
No, but you can, I know Kirsten's going to talk about where you can buy trees. One thing I caution about free trees sometimes, and because I live in Spokane, sometimes the forest give free trees. They've changed a lot what free trees give out. Because even I've given away free trees, sometimes we get leftover trees, but I'm careful who I give them to. Because what we found out over the years is when you get a tree, you want it to be from a certain area. You have Douglas fir here, you have ponderosa pine. It's lived here long enough, it's slightly different than the Douglas fir at 4,500 feet in North Okanogan County. Because the growing season in North Okanogan County is shorter than yours. These Douglas fir are used to, I don't know, what's the growing season here, 120 days? All right, they're used to the Okanogan Valley growing season this. The Douglas fir up north at 4,500 are growing season like this. If you take your seedlings and plant them up north, they don't do very well because they're used to a long growing season. And all of a sudden it gets cold before they're used to shutting down, they don't do well.
But the Forest Service should be able to tell us what we can and shouldn't plant on our land, couldn't they?
They could, I just be cautious sometimes about free trees, especially the ones you get in the mail. Just
No,
because,
it's not about the Forest Service. You know, because of what's happened, they could come in with a whole bunch of, excuse me, little trees and say, okay, anybody that wants to plant in this area, here's the trees, come and get them, and we could go plant them.
they could, you'd have to talk to them, but I can pretty well tell you that won't happen
It
this
won't
spring.
happen.
Reason is, it takes 1 to 2 years to grow a seedling. Okay? That's the problem. Even the Forest Service, if we want to go plant 300,000 trees this spring, we can't. Because
It's
we don't
like
have them.
bird seed, why are they not handing out packets of bird seed and saying, here, eat the birds?
That's a wildlife question. Whether the birds need it or not.
And it's a species introduction too.
No.
Yeah.
Kirsten.
Well,
Not
it-
the
it-
conservation
So let's talk about trees are in Barfield. One of the things that we get is what we call blue stain with on our pine trees. Okay, this is a stain that's usually came with the bark beetle. Okay, the reason this is important, this is to protect value and what you mentioned about conifers and pine. Okay, this is a log cut, so staining, usually brought in by the bark beetle, doesn't decrease the structurality of the wood, it stains it. It makes it look very pretty like this desk. Okay? If you go to your local specialty wood store, you pay an arm and a leg for this.
Yeah.
If you take this log to sell to the mill, they pay you almost nothing. Okay? There's a reverse correlation there that's bad for you. Sorry to say that. That's just the way it is. Okay? One of the things, and that's why I bring this up, is for the pine trees, if you're thinking about trying to get some economic value, you need to make your decision immediately. I've talked to people, read studies, experienced myself. Some people, it'll be 6 weeks, it'll stay 6 months, 8 months. What I found over the years, every single person was right, depending on the situation, when it burned. Generally, the early season burn like this, the stain will get quicker than a late season burn. Okay, so you need to make a decision fairly rapidly if you want to log. Make a decision and see if you can explore that, if economics is one consideration. One thing about forest practices is if you're going to log and sell your trees, you do need a permit. They will prioritize submit high priority to get into the process quickly, so you can get logging quickly. If you do anything near creeks, check with the forest practices on that. The rules were created to protect habitat in the forest. The key thing, if you log, reforestation maybe is usually required, and that can be a challenge in reforestation in Okanogan County. Personally, we cover about planting, and you're covering that, right?
Terry is.
There it is. Reforestation on that. But there are some requirements and some ways to discuss that. I am not the forest practice forester. Shane Milton is, and he gave me permission to give out a cell number, which doesn't happen very often. Okay? Because this is such a, we want to make sure if you want to log, you get your needs filled quickly. So he did give out his cell number right here. Okay? His card's in the back, some of his cards. So call him if you have any questions. The key thing is, if you're going to sell, you need a permit. One, someone mentioned hazard trees. Okay, if a tree is going to hit your house, you still have to follow the rules, but you won't need a permit. Okay? So you can go cut that tree down right now. I think it's a tree length and a half from your house. So if you have 100-foot tall trees, anything within 150 feet of your house, you don't necessarily have to, you don't need to get a permit. You still just, we call it follow the rules, which means the rules say that anything with tree length in the house, you can cut without a permit.
Even if it's on your, not on your property?
That's private property rights. That's a whole nother subject matter.
'Cause that's
We
that's
can't
happening.
give you
It's
permission to
happening all
go
over the place.
We just can say you don't need a permit. You still need the private property rights permission. The other thing, you can always call our office. This is our call bill office that the number you're looking for to talk about state lands? Same number?
Because they don't want their trees and they're not gonna recognize their trees, maybe I'll go ahead and cut them down. So,
If you decide on logging, the number one way to be successful in logging, the three number one things: contract, contract, contract. Number one, to have a successful home built. Number one thing to have successful remodeling built. It's all the same. A logger is just another contractor. Remember that. Treat them just like you treat any other contractor. Contract, contract, contract. There's some sample contracts back there. I'm managing your timber sale. One thing, if you're going to log, one thing talking about the market. Is there a market for pine? I've made several phone calls, haven't got any answers back. Is someone going to buy pine? One thing we've noticed in past projects like this, if you can work with your neighbors and work with one logger or hire a consulting force to organize for you, you can, just like you have buying power in your group, you have selling power in your group. A male would prefer to buy 500,000 from the consulting, 500,000 board feet of lumber from a consulting forester versus dealing with 50 landowners. That makes sense? So sometimes working as a community, and also it can reduce the cost of the operation, because every time you have a load boy bring in a skidder, it's $500 down the tubes. You'd rather have that money going to you. Okay? So working together as a community or a neighborhood may make some of you be able to make some money on it. Generally, if the ground is steep, that's my definition of steep. If I start walking up the hill and 50 feet I start breathing, you're probably not going to find that economic feat to log. They have to do some type of cable system. Okay? It's pretty much going to have to be ground-based for you to make any chance of making money. The flip side with logging can cause a lot of disturbance, so it goes back to your goals and your objectives. Do I want to put up with a skid trail on my property if it's like this? Okay, that's why I asked you guys to write your goals and objectives. You'll balance the needs out, how much money I can make versus how much other values I have for my property. Okay. Hire a consultant to help you. There's a publication manual timber sale. The key thing when you work with these people, make sure you share your goals and your objectives with them. This is what I value. Couple publications. Consulting Force, WSU. I think Kirsten knows one locally she might share. Local consultant there. You can always call me and I can email you a list. When you're selecting a logger, it's no different than any other contractor. They got a business license, they got insurance, reference. The last thing some people have asked me, well, I can't decide between the two, but I think you get along with this fighter. Your gut has it input into it. You got to work with whoever contractor you're hired. If you don't think you can work with a contract, I don't care what his reference and price is. Don't hire him because you won't be able to work with him. So the gut has something to do with it. The Washington Contract Loggers Association has a listing of loggers at httploggers.com. Kirsten gave me the 10-minute warning, so I got to speed up. Dead trees, wildlife habitat. Cover one aspect of your dead trees and what they can do for wildlife. Fires are devastation in the short term. That is true. Recovery is natural, and dead trees provide habitat standing and falling. This is just 10 years post-fire. A lot of changing happening. 20 years in a different area. Key thing about dead trees is they do provide habitat. Okay, this is a dead tree 10 years after fire. What he's trying to make note here is habitat, birdhouses. The living natural birdhouse are the big trees. The bigger they are, the better they are for wildlife. Leaving a couple of those dead trees per acre is good for wildlife. Goes back to your values again, what you want your property for. And even snag, this is a broken fire tree, it's still habitat for wildlife. They provide homes, they harbor insects, and like I talked about earlier, one thing about the bark beetle, they like that sugar layer. Once that sugar layer deteriorated, they're no longer forest health housing. As a rule of thumb, bark beetles are not in dead trees, they're in green trees. Once a tree turns red, in the normal life cycle, the bark beetle's gone 90% of the time. Okay? So generally, dead trees are not a forest health issue. They're an aesthetic issue. One thing about wildlife, large trees are the best. They are providing food and habitat for the critters out there. specifically the birds. One thing, if you got a bunch of small trees, one thing with most small trees. If you got a bunch of small trees, your grass, your shrubs are burned up, you lost a lot of habitat. You can create little habitat piles. Take a bunch of those small trees down and make a pile. Okay, 4 to 6 feet in diameter, loosely packed, one every 100 feet, a couple per acre. Some people say, well, that's a fire hazard. I tell people, even if this was on your green property, as a firefighter, if you have one pile out there and they're catching on fire, the firefighter, guess what I'm going to do with that pile? Nothing. I'm going to step 10 feet back and put out the fire there. One pile here and there isn't a fire hazard. Okay? Hundreds of piles per acre is a fire hazard. But 2 piles, 3 piles per acre is not a fire hazard. So I tell people, if I can easily drive my fire truck around your property, you're probably okay. This is the habitat pile in the winter, provides shelter. We were talking to one lady who follows it. She puts these piles out in her area for her cat to hide from the owls. That's her wildlife habitat, to protect her cat from the wildlife. But she has these habitat piles for cat shelters. The other thing is down logs are good. Just leaving the dead log in the ground, 2 to 4 acres, what we mainly recommend, is good for wildlife. You may not recognize this. Can anyone recognize what that is?
A morel mushroom.
Morel mushroom. Yes, bright shelter. Okay, also drumming sites. You guys grouse up here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, drumming sites for grouse. Grouse love down material. It doesn't matter if the log is elevated or on the ground. If it's elevated, it provides slightly different habitat when it's on the ground. The elevated logging, 15 years, where is it going to be?
On the ground.
On the ground. Don't do the work. I just let Mother Nature do the course. Okay?
What if you've got 30 down trees per acre?
That becomes, from a wildlife standpoint, more is the better. From aesthetics and other factors, that's where your other goals come into perspective. Okay. They can help with erosion, depending how they're placed. Generally, and this again, I'm talking about from what you need from wildlife. Someone from erosion say this tree that's elevated on a hill contour, they may say drop it because of erosion control. Whereas the wildlife guy, he said doesn't matter to me. Those goes back to your goals and objectives. Okay? And that's where you have to take all this information and meet your goals and objectives. It's not an easy path you're going down. You do have to make a lot of choices, and a lot of times you're going to ponder, what do I do? Here's what I can say. Any choice you make is better than this comes from the military. Like, making a decision is the best thing you can do, period. Okay? It will be better than pondering and not making a decision because you're scared. This is the worst choice you can make. Okay? You're doing what Rice says by coming and saying we gather information.
Do those down trees agree to potential losses from mud flow and whatnot? Is there a trade-off as far as that goes? Or?
Typically, what you're talking, for erosion control on a hillside, you're laying it across the slope, so it's helping to stop
Would
the
be a good
erosion from
thing,
the hill.
really.
And typically, you're not dropping these in drainages. If you are dropping it in the bottom of the draw, yeah, you probably are adding to it potentially.
So pull it out of the draw,
Well, yes.
or don't drop it.
Yeah, we're not talking about pulling it out of a live stream, but if it's in a draw, you can pull it out.
Okay, I'm just wondering if this, we're talking about all these down trees. So.
Pretty much, it's pretty labor intensive. I wouldn't go out of your way of dropping a tree in the draw. And if they're already falling down, you can wear yourself out pretty quick. There's not a lot.
One of the key things is I tell people, sometimes I'm like Neil Bailey, sometimes I'd say I'm lazy sometimes. I'd rather go fishing than sometimes doing a lot of work or working on another project. Nature will do a lot of benefit. The key thing with nature, if you let her do reports, it'll take 5 to 10 to 15 years. A lot of times as human beings, we run on the annual cycle. We like to see things happen quickly. The next plus side about this rain causing some erosion issues, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to see things coming up. That, or you may not see things coming up. That will tell you a lot, right then and there, what you see on the ground in the next 2 to 3 weeks, about how things burn, what's recovering, and how much work you need to do. I personally like to save my money to take my wife out. I don't want to spend any more money on remodeling my house than I have to. You're remodeling your land. Think of it that way. What else could you do with your money that would be more that could give you some value? The last thing I want to just briefly say is tax deductions. There's a handout there from the IRS about casualty loss, and if you can't log, or if you'll log and get less money, can you take a casualty loss? I read that publication. I understand every time they said the word tree, I understood that word. All the other words pretty well went over my head. I give you that so you can take to your accountant to share it with them so they can do the research for you. Okay? If you need any help on trees, you can give us a call. Kirsten Conservation District is being the general catch-all for everything. If you know who to call, if you need some help. The other thing, if you have some specific questions on some of the things I'm talking about, you can call our office as well. And we can have someone come out and help you. We have some foresters who can even come walk the property with you to look at some of the trees. Any more questions? That's the Colville Northeast Region office. And we do have forests locally here. They're kind of strapped right now, but we should be able to help you very
Talk a little bit more about the reseeding, revegetation kind of ideas that we'll talk about this morning. I really liked Guy's talk because did you get the sense that it's okay unless you have some really egregious situation that's really unusual or really dangerous and hazardous, it's best to hang out a little bit and wait and see what's going to happen. And I'm going to say that about the range shrubs, the sagebrush, bitterbrush, that kind of thing, the grasses, the riparian areas, the tree reforestation. Some of that is you're going to be able to much better assess that after you wait a little bit and see what happens. I know that it's frustrating, especially when you love the place that you live and we came here for a reason, right? Or we live here for a reason, we stay here for a reason. We love the natural outdoors, we like those landscapes. And it's a difficult thing to see them change the way that they've changed in such a big hurry. But you have to understand a little bit about nature. This is how it was forever, for a long, long time. These are the landscapes that developed under regimes of fairly frequent fires coming through. So a lot of the plants are actually designed or have the ability to regenerate. The blackened stumps of sagebrush, the blackened stumps of bitterbrush, they have the capability and the structures within them to sprout back up from the roots. And you're seeing a little bit of that in your riparian draws, especially where there's a little bit more water. You're going to see a lot more of it in the next couple weeks because of the rain. The soils were dry to begin with. The fire came through and baked out whatever water was in there that was left. And so everything was sort of holding tight, except in those riparian areas where there was a little extra water. And in those areas, what are you seeing? Seeing grass. Sometimes you're seeing shrubs or weeds come up in those burned off areas. That's the start of the regeneration. That takes time. And so there are some situations that are time sensitive and hazard sensitive that you want to address fairly quickly after with reseeding or replanting trees. There's just a few of those really important kind of exceptions to the general rule of hang out and see what happens, and then a little later make an assessment and see if there's something that needs to be done or something that you'd like to see happen, and you can add things later. Most of you right now have a lot to do. You're already, in the midst of insurance, and you're in the midst of looking for resources, and you're in the midst of learning a whole new way to live. Maybe your house burned and you're figuring out where you're going to live. There's a lot on your plate right now. The reseeding and revegetation really can wait a little bit, except in these few situations that I'm going to talk about now. One of those is what Stan was talking about earlier, where you have a large draw. You have a large watershed above, you have a draw, and you have a house at the bottom. That's infrastructure, okay? You got to think about it even bigger than your property. I know you're used to thinking about the property line, and you really don't have any say on what other people do, but it's a great advantage to kind of step back and look at the context of your property in the larger landscape and see what's happening there. I'm a little bit worried about the fact that lots of folks in the burn zone are concerned about flood insurance, but people in areas below where it burned are not, because they are at some risk of flooding and things happening to their property because of what's happening above them. That hasn't really affected them on the fire scale, but in the flood scale it could. So it's good to take a little step back, take a look at what the larger watershed is looking like, where the water is likely to come down. Stan pointed out that there's going to be a lot more water running off than usual. Something else that happens during wildfires like this is the underground hydrology of the water changes sometimes. And so sometimes you'll have springs popping up where there were no springs before. Sometimes you'll have springs disappearing where there were springs before. So a lot of water hydrology is changing in that landscape that you're looking at. So just the general message there is be prepared. Be prepared on a personal level, where if you're in a situation, if your home's in a situation where it's likely to be impacted, no amount of reseeding right this minute is going to help you in 2 weeks, okay, to protect you from a flood. Some of the emergency watershed protection kind of measures that they're taking with eco blocks and some more structural kinds of solutions, they're going to help, but they're going to take a little bit of time to get organized and get on the ground. So first point, protect yourself. Make sure you're ready to bug out. Make sure you're watching the weather. Make sure that you're taking care of the business of staying safe. Okay, that's first number one. The reseed and revegetation can come a little bit later. So my first recommendation is wait and see. In areas where there's been disturbance on the ground, say you have fire line cut through your property somewhere, or above your property somewhere, or maybe heavy equipment that you were moving around. Maybe you're getting your horses out, so you're moving the trailers around in areas where you normally wouldn't be driving those. Any place where there was a really intense weed problem previously, this is actually an opportunity to get a handle on the weeds. If you have a really weedy area, some of those perennial weeds are likely not to have been damaged in the ground where the roots are. I used to work in a nursery and worked in a perennial greenhouse. And I oftentimes thought in the winter that the business of growing perennials was growing up olive roots, because that's all you could see in the greenhouse were these pots of nothing. Because what we were protecting was the root systems. We were watering, we were fertilizing, we were doing all the normal things, but none of those plants were actually above the ground. So your perennial weeds are going to be treated a little bit differently than your annual weeds, and you're going to be watching for different things. And if you have a specific situation, a specific set of weed problems that you have, I would suggest that you call me at the Conservation District. If I don't know the answer, I will refer you to the folks who do. And I'm real tight with the weed board, I'm real tight with some other folks that know quite a bit about weeds.
2 days before the fire, I called the weed man to come spray my driveway, full of weeds. Been sprayed 6 times, didn't help.
Okay.
Okay, so he was gonna come, I called him when I'm running out of here, don't come, fire's coming. I come back, everything burned except the weeds.
No advantage there, dang it, no
You want
advantage
everything to
there.
happen.
That's sad, that's horrible. Yeah, in those areas where weedy areas did burn, what it did do is set them back. So now you have an opportunity to go in and give them a little competition, make them work a little harder for their spot in the soil. You can put some seed in. Now that we've had a little bit of rainfall, I wouldn't even have recommended anybody reseed anything before this point. Even the dryland wheat, even the sterile wheat varieties that we're recommending on, the super critical slopes and things that you want to get something going really quickly, even that there wasn't enough moisture in the soil to germinate it. But now we've got a little bit of moisture in the soil. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more Hopefully it won't revert back to the 107-degree, August that we are probably going to have again. But at least we have a little bit of water for germination. So there are a couple of strategies you can use. If you have one of those really critical areas and you need to get something down quickly, bare soil is going to move. Okay? Bare soil on a slope is really going to move. But the plant roots are going to help tie that soil together. So that soil erosion, that serious soil erosion will be helped by the plant roots. Helped by grasses, helped by shrubs, helped by trees. Okay? All of those plants are going to help. Grasses are quick to get established, so that's kind of your first line of defense is if you need to get something tied down quickly, get some grasses in. There are some sterile wheat varieties that are quite good in low moisture situations. They'll germinate with very little water, and they'll get established quickly. So those are some. Huh?
Are those good for deer?
I would imagine deer would eat them. I'm not a wildlife expert for sure, but I would imagine deer would eat them. My sheep do, and they're similar kinds of creatures. The other cool thing about the wheat is that you can use it as a nurse crop for other native plants that take longer to get established. So if you plant the wheat, you might want to do them both at the same time. Depending on your situation, you might want to do them both at the same time. And you would reduce the rate, the amount of seed per acre or per square foot that you're putting down of the wheat if you're also planting other things so that it's not out competing the natives. But native plants benefit, especially in the establishment phase, from a little bit of something else there. So that's going to be a little bit of like a nurse plant for those native plants. So we have some seeding recommendations on our website, and we're going to put that up here too. We have a special page for Carlton Fire Recovery. There are a couple of different seeding recommendations there. One of them is from our friends at the NRCS, and they developed that. It's primarily erosion control type mix, emergency focused. So it's going to be more things that come up quickly and get established, and then you can do other things later. If you're super concerned about planting native seed, that's very locally specific. We have another list there from a company called BFI Natives, and they've developed a list from that NRCS list that is more local ecotypes of native plants.
I have a couple of questions. Did you say a few words about fireweed? We were also in the buckhorn fire, and that area is just thick with fireweed right now, which I don't. Is it a legume? It's got pods. Does it?
No.
Nitrogen
I
for the
don't
soil?
believe it's a legume, but it comes in quickly after the fire, and if I recall correctly, it's got some physiological things that are within the seed that keep it from germinating until there's a fire, and then it kind of comes in. You see it quickly. It's always been there. The seed's been there, but it's physiologically being activated by the fire. So it's coming in. It's cool. I don't know what else to say about it. It's helping cover the soil, so it's a benefit.
It's a pioneer species, so
Yeah.
it's one of the first ones that'll come in and
Yeah.
as other things come in and shade it out and not disappear.
So how long does it persist?
Quite a while. In the places that I've seen, 4 or 5 years probably or better. So it's fairly persistent, unless there's a lot of quick growth of other stuff. And around here, we tend not to have that because of our precipitation rates are low.
So could you say something also about pine grass? We're real interested in that. Are there flights available? How would that, our buckhorn side is very steep. It's thick with firewood now. This fire burned the other side of our property, which was pine grass. Our preference would be seeing pine grass there.
Sure.
You can't even walk through the fireweed, it's so thick.
Right.
But if that's what
Well,
needs to be there. And
Are
there are
your
different
trees
facing
gone?
slopes.
Are your trees gone?
Well, it's just gonna depend on, the crowns are fine, but they're burned around things.
Okay. So with the pine grass is a little more difficult to get started from seed, which I think your question before was about plugs,
Yeah.
the possibility of plugs. It also is fairly picky about its location. It needs to be fairly shady. So if your trees are gone, it may not reestablish well. If you've got enough shade and you're at a high enough elevation, I would speak with Rob Crandall of Methow Natives and see if he has a source for the plugs. They're very difficult from seed, so even the nurseries are going to have a hard time getting the plugs because they're difficult to get from seed.
So I assume you can take a plug from the other part of your property and plug it there.
I would imagine it's not particularly happy about being transplanted either. But again, these are habitats and landscapes that developed in association with fire. So that it's going to tend to come back in where the conditions are right for it. So I would
I'm
wait
talking
and
about
see.
the place that was dug up by the
Oh,
firefighters,
yeah.
you know, that's where
Yeah.
it was, it liked it there, but now I think the roots have been disturbed, so I was thinking about plugs.
That would be a tricky situation.
Retransplanted it okay. I heard
Yeah.
it.
There's a
Well-
nursery out of Tico called Plants in the Wild, and if anybody had it, I suspect they would.
Yeah. They have some pretty good stuff. In those really, I mean, you're making a judgment call there on how quickly are the weeds gonna come in. Do you wanna fight them with something that's going to be competitive, which is not gonna be pine grass? Do you know what I'm saying? If you want to, you'll have to balance in your own mind what you're willing to do to get pine grass back there. If you're willing to, do some intensive weed control there, then you would wait and see if the pine grass came back, watch all the weeds come up, take the weeds out, transplant something or get some plugs, put it in there. Again, reevaluating, taking the weeds out so there's gonna be some labor and time and energy involved in that. And whether you're willing to do that to that extent is a question that's up.
So do you have any recommendation on timing with pine grass?
I'm not so familiar with the propagation of that, so maybe Stan has a better idea, but.
Really, what I've observed, I mean, it kind of works its way in naturally by itself. I don't have much experience with success or failure of people actually trying to do it. I do know when you open up, when you're thinning your forest stands and some sunlight in there, will get in there, but you still have some shade, it moves in by itself.
Yeah, that's what is happening on that property as we got, thinned out the trees that we got there.
Were some other questions?
I just wanted to kind of state, I know with the NRCS and, their recommendations that they make, a lot of times when you're buying natives, you'll see things that say, native harvest, no seed test. If you are gonna get any sort of cost shares or anything like that, your seed needs to be tested. If you're buying seed that says no test available, you don't know that that seed is what it is, you don't know that it has any germination, you're buying basically inert matter. I mean, it's very scary. So make sure when you're buying your native seeds that you're buying them from somebody that has sent them to a state lab. They are propagating things that are put together by Plant Materials. That way you know what you're getting and you know that the seed's viable. It's a lot of work to plant seeds, so if it's not going to grow, it's a waste of time.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. You always want to buy from reputable folks who are willing to stand behind what they offer.
And commonly, we're talking about seeding where you don't have irrigation, maybe you have irrigation or house sprinklers, that's a whole different story. So typically, your dry land seeding, and normally you do a fall dormant seeding. If you have the opportunity to spread a little straw over it to act as a little bit of mulch and protection for it, that increases your odds of germination. But and by fall dormant, I mean when the soil temperature drops to 40 degrees, typically talking towards the end of October into November, preferably before it snows. People have can still put it on after it snows and it's down, but if you can get it in before it snows, you increase your chances.
So that's a good point. Limiting factors are, are you trying to establish something in an area that has to be dealt with immediately? That's going to be a problem with precipitation if you don't have supplemental irrigation. If you wait until later, then you have that problem with weed control in the meantime. So there's some interesting balances there. I wanted to talk a little bit about, and this ties in with what Stan just said, a little bit about how plants respond in different times of the year. Sometimes we look at a tree and we think, well, it's just kind of growing, and then in the winter it kind of goes dormant. There's a lot going on under the ground during those different seasons, and I kind of think of it as in spring, a plant's energy is going up. I mean, we talk about sap rising. The plant's energy is to go up and out, okay, and make leaves and make needles and all that kind of thing, but it's not really putting any energy into roots. So any kind of perennial plant, any kind of perennial grass, any kind of perennial shrub or tree, you guys know what I mean by perennial, comes back every year. It's, like I said before, you need that, what you're growing is the roots. If you grow the roots well, the plant will take care of itself. But if you plant in the spring, that plant's energy is going up into the top of the tree. It's not putting a lot of energy into rooting. So if you can plant in the fall, any of those perennial plants, you're going to have better success as long as you've got enough moisture. And that's another good thing about fall is we tend to have little long periods of kind of drizzly and kind of, a little more moisture. We're not getting really heavy, quick rainfalls. We're getting it a little bit softer and nicer. And those plants will be sucking all that energy that they've been collecting all year in their leaves and putting it down into the roots for winter. So they're growing roots anytime the ground is not frozen, solid. So fall is the time to plant for anything perennial, okay? Annual is a whole different ballgame. But in the spring, what do you have? You have a quick rise from too cold to plant to summertime temperatures. That's a really erratic pattern. It doesn't kind of go up smoothly. You have hot days and then cold days and then hot days and cold days. That will tend to stress your plants out. So if you can plant in the fall, that's a good thing. Supply is a little bit of a problem that way because most people buy their plants in the spring. Most nurseries are growing for a spring sale. So the other thing to be really aware of in the spring is precipitation. You may have good rain, you may have not good rain, you have this high temperature coming quickly, you've got a very short window to get your plants established, so it's going to take more time and energy and money to get them established in that little short window in the spring versus in the fall. Okay? As far as bitter brush, I don't know if I should probably defer that question to Stan as well. I'd imagine that the bitter brush it is one of those fire-adapted plants that will come back, but you have set it back. Well, nature set it back, how about that? So now would be probably, I would watch and see, because what you're going to see is grasses coming in. The native grasses that were in your area before are going to come back more, because your bitter brush is set back. Originally, in the original landscape, before we started messing with things and suppressing fire, those fires were coming through fairly frequently and burning off the bitter brush, and the grassland would come back. So that cycle of more bitter brush, and then getting burned out, and then more bitter brush, and then it getting burned out was more frequent. And I'm imagining that the site that you had was undisturbed for quite a long time.
It has been undisturbed for a very long time.
So there are ways to manage that later, but I would imagine that your bitter brush problem will be set back for a little while.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I would wait and see probably on that one. Do you agree, Stan?
Yeah.
Okay. Native plant
The
resources.
last thing you want to do is start
Yeah.
tearing something like that out,
Exactly.
making the soil more vulnerable.
Right. Well, another beauty of the wait and see is you're not out there tearing up soil that's already fragile. okay? So think about that. Weigh your pluses and minuses that way. Are your weeds gonna come in where you're stepping around planting things? Probably. So, be careful about that. And then if you do have those big disturbance areas, especially heavy equipment, fire lines, those kinds of things, it's already disturbed. You can't hurt it anymore, right? So you would want to get in and do some reseeding on those kind of areas, especially because the weeds will come in and you want to give them a little bit of competition. So native plant resources, we have our annual plant sale, and we are getting in some restoration types of seeds for that plant sale. We do have that in the spring. We do know better. We can't get our plants except in spring. So we were able to get some seed ahead of time. But and we do sell native trees, shrubs, grass mixes. We have a really nice lawn mix. We have a xeriscape flower mix. We have quite a few things that are of pretty good interest. Methow Natives is another local resource. I'm going to let you talk to those guys about that. Like I said, we have our seeding recommendations from BFI Natives. That's sort of a large scale, more wholesale seed company, but they will take, if you want to get together with your neighbors and make a larger order, that's another possibility as far as a source. Plants of the wild, there's actually quite a few native plant resources around. So there's, if you need more help with that, call us at the office.
Carrie, the plant sale was spring, is that what you said, not
Yeah.
fall?
Right.
Now, are you gonna have seeds for sale this fall possibly?
We've been talking about that. I don't know that we've made a decision about that yet.
Okay.
But we do have some in hand that we'd rather not store over the winter. So I would imagine at least that batch will probably be for sale this fall. Anything that we're doing, we're gonna post on our website. So go to the website. If you have, if you wanna know what's currently going on and what the current stuff is, that's where to go. And I talked about tree replanting. I'm not gonna talk too much about that, yeah?
Much earlier it was mentioned that as far as right now, you don't know any resources or don't anticipate any resources for free seed, things like that, or...
Okay, so there's a couple of organizations that are actually also working in the area. I don't know if you've heard of the CCAN group of folks. They're like a community network of people. Michelle, right?
Yes.
Michelle is a representative from CCAN, and they're trying to fill in gaps of
We raise money, basically.
with funding to get people what they need, basically. If it isn't handled some other way, they're looking for funding to make something happen. So they would be great folks to talk with about that. And then it sounded like some of the local folks, if you're in a real bind for something, the local feed stores are carrying a lot of the revegetation seed.
They're actually carrying all of the mixes that are
Yeah.
suggested by the NRCS.
Yeah. So there are some other resources, and there may be other programs coming out that we're working on now that we can't really give you specific information about yet because they're not developed. So the Conservation District is also doing work in agricultural fields, doing cattle fencing, doing irrigation systems and all that kind of thing. So we're also kind of looking for places where we can help out. And reseeding is high on our list. So there may be more available that way.
So we're looking at that. What's happening to that organic matter? We're also looking at aggregate stability. And if you take a handful of soil, let's say it's nice black soil and there's lots of organic matter, you have these little clumps, and we call it aggregate stability. And this is where you have your sandsill clay, and you have some organic matter, and you have some roots and some biological activity, and it holds it together. And so the better the aggregate stability, the nicer our soil is. So this allows water to infiltrate. It has high organic matter, so it's high in nutrients, and it also allows for aeration in the soil. Moderate burn intensity. This is not a bad thing because we've just burned off a lot of our organic matter, and so this needle loss is putting organic matter back on the soil, which allows for raindrops to hit that. You will see an increase in your soil nutrition. However, in the long term, because we don't have the slow release anymore, we just have that quick release, there's going to be a time frame where you have a lower nutrients in the
After
soil.
that initial flush of
Mhm.
nutrition, okay.
Yeah. You know, we can't stress that enough. Just unless you have really steep slope, just see what comes back.